Jim, we got so bogged down with stuff last week, and there's even more wrestling this weekend. It's amazing how much stuff we have to watch. We didn't get to watch WWE Rivals, the new season, and the first episode, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant.
Well, and actually this time of year, I mean, it's all hitting us. The WrestleMania awareness is upon us. So that's when A&E launches their new line of docudrama programming. And then AEW is trying to do whatever the it is they're trying to do. So there's a lot of stuff to keep up with just there without going any deeper in the wide world of wrestling. But the one thing that I do and often do, not always, but often do enjoy about the A&E stuff or any kind of documentaries is at least it's not the new shit. At least we get to see the old shit, the stuff that people actually watched in large numbers and are still talking about. And it's refreshing in every other way except I've mentioned before when you go back and you see the people jumping up and down and the guys and they're into it and it's just it hurts my feelings when I think we don't have that anymore, but at least now more people are getting to see it, right? So it's bittersweet. But with Hogan and Andre, this was the dream match of the modern era. And I don't know. I mean, there were maybe shit. In its time, was it bigger than Londos and Lewis? That was, what were the biggest, most publicized wrestling matches of their era? One would have to think that this would be top 2 or 3, right? Because just of the magnitude of it, I mean, there were matches all through wrestling history that drew big crowds, and Londos in the 30s, and Thez and everybody that contributed to that boom in the 50s. But this was the dream match that people wanted to see in their minds before they ever knew they'd actually get to see it, maybe more than any other, right?
I think so. And, we talk about so much wrestling, when we talk about, let's say, the Rock and Roll Express and the merch money in 1986 versus what it would have been today if they had the modern mechanisms and the different things that they could have done today, they would have made so much more money. Hogan and Andre, if we were looking specifically at WrestleMania 3, look at how much money that made. Look at what the payoffs were for even Heenan. And imagine that with today's money and the way of merchandising and pushing everything. It was a major event. It was a big deal. And WWE almost successfully, to anyone who wasn't an older fan, wiped the memory of any Hogan-Andre history before 1984 to build up to WrestleMania 3. Certainly, they wiped any body slam history.
Well, and remember also, was this the first crack in the relationship maybe between Barnett and Vince because of the payoffs?
Oh, because the story is that Vince ripped up what Barnett was Barnett was handling the payoffs and Vince overruled him, correct?
And I heard that from people who were actually in the office at the time. So it's not like wrestling hyperbole. Barnett wanted to give Hogan and Andre $250,000 apiece, and that's in 1987. So what would that be today? Close. And this was, again, people say this was the biggest pay-per-view wrestling event ever. And technically it was in terms of the buy rate, the amount of people who bought it versus the amount of overall pay-per-view audience that there was at the time. And like 10% of the audience, it was never done again, bought this fucking thing. But the pay-per-view matches in the modern era, of course, gross more monies. But at that time, $250,000 was one of the what would have been a bigger payoff at that point? Anything in Japan?
I don't know if anything.
Ever.
I don't know if any single match would have had a payoff for one of the participants.
Besides Ali and Inoki, and Inoki was doing the thing because of the publicity. There was no. So that would have been alone one of, if not the biggest wrestling payoffs at the time.
And 250,
Anyway.
and for the record, 250 today would be approximately $658,000.
Well, there you go. Vince overruled him and gave him $750 apiece. He was that thrilled at the outcome.
That's just under $2 million today.
There you go. But it was a dream match at the time that had never been seen nationally. And we can go through and talk about how that they did succeed in the build to WrestleMania 3. They couldn't erase the memories that the Northeast fans had. It had only been 7 years since Shea Stadium, right? For the people, the most diehard fans who watched TV and etc. But this worked anyway because for those fans, the positions were reversed. Andre had been the beloved babyface. Hogan had been the heel. So technically, when Andre won at that point in time, they loved it, and it proved for them that Andre could beat Hogan. So now with Hogan the hero and Andre the despicable villain, Hogan could be in trouble for those people in the Northeast, right? And they did the match in some other places, but not in, like it was done in Southeastern when Hogan was Sterling Golden, I think, still, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was on the JYD Michael Hayes Superdome show.
It was on the JYD Superdome show, but at the same time, yeah, that was 30,000 people, but it was only in New Orleans. They didn't go around the territory with it. So I get what I'm saying is the Northeast fans really knew that there had been a previous Hogan-Andre history when the roles were reversed, but it had been years. Now, again, Hogan's the hero, the push behind him, and the national audience. Because for everybody else in the country, oh my God, this has never happened before. For the people in, Oklahoma or goddamn Minneapolis, for fuck's sake, right? Where Hogan had just been so hot. So it would have been like, there was no way to do a dream match like this in the 1970s or in the earlier territory days because every part of the country disagreed amongst the fans on who the greatest wrestler in the world was, and it was usually the top guy in their territory, right? And sometimes you could make a case for it. Well, it's both, but the people in one part of the country didn't want to see the same match that people in the other part of the country did. The closest thing to Hogan and Andre would have been Andre and Bruno Sammartino from 74 to 78, 79, 80. That would have been the closest thing to an untouchable dream match of the irresistible force meets the immovable object. And Vince Sr. specifically refused to do that match, even when Bruno brought it up one time. They could do Shea Stadium. And he said no, because he had the two greatest attractions in the wrestling business, both under his control, and both were the most beloved figures in the business. And he wasn't going to turn either one of them heel for the sake of one match or one program, even an all-time record breaker. And he didn't want a babyface match because still he felt that it would diminish the love that some fans had for one guy or the other to see them fight. And that was so you never got that. So this was, again, it was a natural dream match.
In the era before you had what we have today or what you had in the late 80s, even with pay-per-view and building to big events, and programs can be bigger because you're building to bigger things. I mean, that's what Dusty did too.
Right.
Would a heel turn for one of those kind of guys have been counterproductive because you would have gotten a 3-match run or something, but then it would have limited what you could do with them going forward because you don't have big shows that you're building to like that. Shea Stadium was once every several years for a decade. That was it.
Well, yes, and also, to be honest, I don't know that WrestleMania 3 would have happened, or the Hogan and Andre match would have happened, if Vince hadn't realized that Andre's days in the ring were numbered. If Andre had been it had been the same situation, but Andre was in perfect health and Vince thought there's no reason I'm not going to be booking Andre, for another 5 or 6 years, I don't think he'd have done it. Because that was kind of like the end, the admission that the end was near in hindsight. But at the same time, you're ruining the spotless, clean image that you have built and your father started building of the most recognizable face in professional wrestling since goddamn Gorgeous George, maybe even more than that. And he had been everywhere, and he had been in every magazine. He was the lone wrestler that was on the Tonight Show when nobody else could get on, or the National Talk Show, or the newspapers. They talked about him on Wide World of Sports. Andre was a phenomenon even then, but they had never even teased turning him heel or having him do anything that the fans would in any way react negatively to. But then, not only does Vince have a new superhero, Hulk Hogan, and the build has 84, 85, 83 solid years before they go into WrestleMania 3, but everybody has talked about the condition Andre was in. He knew that he was never going to, Andre was never going to be more over as a babyface than he was already, but I don't think he would have ever turned him unless he saw that if I don't do it now, I'll never do it because he's, right, physically not capable of going on much long. And he didn't. So that's the reason that it was a no-brainer to have that match as a dream match, but the reason why the trigger was pulled on it was because of Andre's condition.
Hey, can I ask you a question? I guess late 86. I was going to say late 86, but really early 87. Building into WrestleMania. Did you have any idea of how big this was? Because you kind of kept up with WWF TV, but you weren't following it. You weren't a fan of it, certainly. Did you understand how big this was before it happened?
Good. Well, yes. Good, because number one, it's Hogan and Andre. And number two, it's in the Silverdome in Pontiac Silverdome. It's Detroit for our international fans. Detroit, Michigan, which is 4 hours from Toronto. The previous summer, Hogan and Orndorff had done almost 70,000 people for that fucking house show in Toronto. So, and that's why they did this. Because Detroit, again, it's not just, WrestleMania 2 was kind of bleh, right? Because they did the three cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. But ticket sales were or whatever, and it was split up. So even though it was a big deal, it wasn't a big deal because it was spread out. It was all over the place, didn't have a focus. But now they've got a goddamn main event in a fucking stadium again in Detroit where they're popular, 4 hours from Toronto, which is one of the great wrestling cities in North America, and also Detroit from Indianapolis, even from here in Louisville, from Cincinnati, from Columbus, from Cleveland, from fucking St. Louis. You could get there, and it was a big match. And so, yeah, that I knew that was going to be huge. And again, they announced, what was the announced figure? 93,000, however many folks.
93,173.
Okay, well, now in modern times, everybody has found out that WWE and WWF before them inflated numbers, and that there was legitimately, we think Uncle Dave uncovered the goddamn building report at some time. There was 78,000 or whatever. It still is 80,000 fucking people. I'm not downplaying it.
They decided on the number before they announced it.
Well, that's it, because Vince wanted to set a record. And a point I was going to make is that for years, people argued, no, they really had 93 because they thought, how can they lie about something like that? And now in modern times, when it's come out that they do exaggerate the figure or add all the fucking employees or the people parked in the Shoney's parking lot next door, however they come up with the number, they accept that now and they know that it's not a real number. But back then, for so long, people bought that number that now that's the number associated with it. But it was still fucking huge. And it's because they were in a centrally located place that they could, draw from multiple metropolitan areas within a 5-6 hour drive. And they had the biggest match that you could put together of all any personalities in wrestling, the most dominant current guy and the most dominant former guy. So that was perfect. And you can tell the panel. I love the old footage from the archives, especially non-WWF stuff, where you got, see some of the territories. But the host, Freddie Prinze Jr., and the panel is random people, and not because I don't like any of them, JBL, Devon, Natalya, Booker T. It's good. None of them were there when this was going on.
They're not known for their wrestling expertise in terms of history, and they weren't there. The other problem is, I enjoy things like this, little historical looks back. Even if they're WWE and slanted history at times, some of the things I enjoy, Hogan, Andre, I enjoy. Why are these guys filmed like they're filming a conspiracy show with Jesse Ventura?
Yeah, they're
dark lights, they're huddled over the table. What the fuck is this?
They're speaking in hushed tones about, and then we planned to whack the guy. Well, and you say historically, so Freddie Prinze Jr. says it's the first huge rivalry in the WWF.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
If the WWF began in 1987, yes.
Well, yes, it was the first huge rivalry of 1987. And then Devon, they did a great job, as you said earlier, of erasing the previous Hogan and Andre program up there when Devon said, well, the Giant had never been defeated before in 15 years of wrestling. And he believes that because he grew up watching WWF, and that's what they were told. And then the 70s and early 80s footage of Andre, and they went a little deeper on this than they normally do for retrospectives, where you saw a little bit more stuff. But again, he was such a different guy in the ring until 82-ish, 3-ish maybe. But they had all territories rep. There was some world class, there was some Mid-South. Of course, Stephanie popped in to say, we were friends. I fell asleep on his lap.
They had to. That drew me into the show. As soon as that was there, I knew they were taking this seriously.
Yes. And
he was my friend. My friend. Come on.
Did we ever see her again after that? But they had footage of Hulk training. And again, it was so great that, what was his name? God damn it. Gordon Soley's son that did the film work in Florida.
Greg Soley.
Greg Soley's the one that did the film, because a lot of times from that era, late 70s Florida, you will see that they had film instead of videotape, and they slow-mode stuff, and they had the workouts that Matsuda would conduct. So they actually have Hogan training before he was anybody but a fucking schmo. And the story of Matsuda breaking his ankle and everything. But my weekly A&E appearance was a picture of Hulk squaring off against Sonny King from, I think it was from Louisville. It was either Louisville or Evansville that I took at the time. Popped up on the screen.
What do you think either one of them, Hogan or Michael Hayes, thought the night in the Superdome when Hogan flies in to wrestle Andre and Hayes is in the main event? These guys had both started in Memphis a year earlier and were real down on the cards. I mean, well, they tried with Hulk, but I mean, he was teaming up with Eddie Boulder. You're not going to be in the main events for long with that.
Well, no, he achieved his level of ability during his run in Memphis. It was still pretty awkward. They put Hulk and Eddie Boulder, his brother Brutus Beefcake for the modern fans, in an angle with Ron Bass and Pete Austin, and tried to get some sympathy on these two big muscle-headed clowns that couldn't really speak yet. And to show that they were important, Jarrett made sure to book them in the main event. And the semifinal was Wayne Ferris, Larry Latham, and Danny Davis in a 3-on-2 handicap match against Jackie and Roughhouse Fargo. Reunited for the first time.
Oh, they got Zulu'd.
In goddamn 2 or 3 years. No, but here it was even worse than that. Because they drew, it was goddamn, that was after the Tupelo concession stand brawl, right? And I think they got Memphis back up to, that night I was there, like almost 8,000 people. It had been down to 2 or whatever. But the goddamn thing is, as soon as the Fargos and Ferris and Latham and Davis finished, the people got up and walked out. And during the main event of Hogan, and they're in there green as grass. And Ron Bass and Pete Austin were not that over his heels at that point either, but you saw the people filing out. Half the crowd. It was a 15-minute match, and by the time they were over with, 4 of those 8,000 people is already gone. And Memphis never left during the main event, ever.
What do you think Hogan thought? What do you think Hogan thought of Roughhouse Fargo the first time he saw him?
Oh, they had no idea what the fuck they'd got into. They had no idea what the fuck they'd got into. But anyway, so they skipped ahead on Rivals to 1980, where Hulk goes in to the WWF as a heel with Freddie Blassie. And, the method of getting juice on Andre or whatever. But then Hulk, again, he goes back and forth between, he kayfabes if it suits his purposes, and he'll spill his guts if it makes him look good. So in this case, it's the self-deprecating Hogan. I was delusional when I was young and strong. I thought I could beat this guy. No, you didn't. But these things, the shows, they fly by with the old footage. And the talking heads of Jimmy Hart and Pat Patterson and Mean Gene, those are great. Because they were there and they were involved. I don't know why that this is, like you said, the fucking meeting of the Colombo family has to happen in the middle of it.
Yeah, it feels like a different show.
The whole tone and everything. It's dark. They covered Hulk and Andre in New Japan, which I didn't, think they would do from a WWF-oriented show. But did you notice, by the way,
every comment from Hulk is, I was scared of Andre, and every picture is him and Andre drinking and smiling.
Yeah, and he said later on, he kept me in line like a mentor. No, all right. But when Hogan, and think about this with modern eyes now. I hadn't watched the Celebration in a while. When Hogan won the title, who was the first one in pouring champagne all over his head? Andre. It wasn't because Andre was so thrilled that his brand new Japanese drinking buddy, that was orchestrated by Vince McMahon Jr. Because, again, it was the blessing. Just to make sure, Bruno ain't going to do this for me. He's not going to come out there and say, oh, Hulk Hogan, you're so great, and, whatever.
Oh, gosh darn it. Oh, you're great.
Yeah, the most beloved wrestling personality of the previous, that was 1984, of the previous 10 years. Starting in 1974, that had ever appeared in Madison Square Garden or worked for the WWF or whatever the fuck, was the first one in line to congratulate this new guy that Vince had decided was going to be his new face. And that's a specific, that's because, nobody else even came in for a while until Andre had been there.
If you watch it when it happened, Ivan Putski eventually comes in and other people.
Well, no, Andre was the first, and he got some time, the unobstructed time. Here's this moment. Okay, now the rest of you schmoes, go ahead. But that was
one of the cool things actually on WrestleMania 3 when you watched it. Because I had a VHS, my father taped it off TV, which I never understood why, because I wasn't even a wrestling fan. I only watched a cartoon at that point. But he felt the urge to tape it, and he didn't like wrestling. And before the main event match, and this may have been the first time they ever really did this. Well, no, I shouldn't say that, Saturday night's main event. But they had for the main matches, Steamboat and Savage, Piper and Adonis, and this one, packages to show you things that led up to this. And it starts with Andre pouring the champagne over Hogan's head.
Yeah. And that, again, that was an endorsement. That was a blessing by the top guy at the time. And then later on, he had started a new story because now there's two top dogs and they coexisted for a while. And then, but in a lot of cases, that's why Vince was sending Andre to Japan so much those few years. It's not like Inoki was going to turn down Andre, the biggest star in the business, but also the whole giant machine thing and whatever the fuck. They were trying to figure out some ways to disguise the fact that Andre was deteriorating and put some smoke and mirrors and other people around him.
Hey, let me ask you a question, because obviously one of the reasons they did it, if not the main reason they did it, was because of the back injury, and you can hide a brace a little bit with the singlet. What are your thoughts of heel Andre going from the trunks to the black singlet?
Well, yeah, it made sense because you've got to, again, when's the last time that somebody, well, I won't say in the modern times because all that shit happens, but Vince Sr. or Vince Jr. was most noted for when somebody switched babyface or heel, they had a completely different appearance, demeanor, tone, approach, whatever, to accentuate the darker side of whatever. So you couldn't really change Andre that much because and he wasn't going to be a fashion plate. Even if they'd make all his shit custom made and pay for it, he still probably wasn't going to wear it. He wore what he wore, right? So, but the little things, it was a little subtle thing, but there's Andre in this black singlet with Bobby Heenan, who had all the color, and there's Andre. The same thing with the attack on the Piper's Pit. Hulk was an overactor even in the 80s. Andre understood the wrestling business. Well, I'm not saying Hogan didn't, but he was just so over the top. But Andre instantly knew how to switch into a heelish demeanor from that, smiling, grinning giant that he had been for all of his life, that he probably 90% of the time didn't feel like being, right? So now he can be surly and whatever. But
and I like early surly. I like early surly Andre before he grew the big mutton chops, because by 89 that made him look. He was still scary to me as a kid. He was in the main event of the first show I ever went to, but it made him look older than he actually was.
Well, besides, Andre was actually a very good promo by the modern definition when he became a heel, as far as sounding like he meant it and being legitimate. But after 87, honestly, nothing. And maybe even the 88 main event, NBC main event match. When you look back on it now, it's only because of the time people bought it. But you look back, you see, my God, this guy can't move. They were still under the fans in those days were still under the hypnosis of it's Andre the Giant. But now you see, so I don't think anything he did really after this, you could say he was good as a heel or effective or whatever, because you started feeling sorry for him visually.
What did you think of the match at WrestleMania 3 and even the follow-up, the one on the main event? And I want to talk about that in a second, but the smart fan of the era hated the match. I mean, notoriously, Dave gave it negative whatever star, said it was the worst match. For me, for a kid like me, when I started watching the tape, I never saw it that way. I never saw it as boring. I saw it as intriguing. And I remember someone telling me years ago how they loved watching from ringside in St. Louis, and they loved watching the actual guy making faces while doing things. It wasn't like they weren't doing anything. So I guess maybe that's the way I saw Hogan and Andre. At no point did they just stop doing anything. And I saw it and I thought it was like the biggest match ever when I was a kid.
Well, it was. And
but is it a bad match just because Andre's, I mean, if they were able to hide it so that I didn't know how much pain he was in until years later, is that a bad match, or is it good because what else was it supposed to be?
All of these things can be true. It depends on what you're looking at. Because again, a lot of guys today will say, well, that was the greatest wrestling match ever because it drew the most money. Well, no, both those things don't have to be true. The worst match of all time can also draw the most money. But that's a lot of guys will say, well, the object is to make money and it's a business and that way. No, it's what are you grading? Was it the biggest dream match of all time? Probably. Was it at the time the biggest grossing match of all time? Certainly.
Possibly the loudest pop of all time on decibel level.
Yeah,
yeah.
Were both these guys the most over guys in the business for a combined 15 or 20 year period, or whatever it was, from when Andre started, when Hogan was not the dominant guy anymore? Yes. Did they have the match that psychologically they exactly should have had? Yes. But would it have been exciting as a match if they were any other two people? No. Because it was a match between two personalities that did exactly what they should have done, and that those personalities were incredibly over. But it wasn't the greatest wrestling match of all time because Andre was almost crippled and Hogan was a competent worker in the physical aspect. So you didn't get Flair and Steamboat. But that doesn't mean that it was, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that those other things weren't true. So it wasn't the greatest wrestling match of all time, but it had a number of other accolades going for it. Like you said, especially, that's why I don't understand today, because you were a kid and you loved it, and because you were into the guys and their personalities and the mean giant and the superhero.
How's he going to beat him?
How's he going to beat him?
How in the world is he going to beat him? Yeah.
Yes. So, but Dave, speaking for the serious fans of professional wrestling who wanted to see the great athletic display, gave it negative stars. But now, the stuff that the kids like and look at with wonderment in their eyes gets 7 stars, and the stuff that the people who are serious about professional wrestling like is so things have flipped. But that's the thing is that no, they were never going to be shooting each other off and giving each other suplexes, and it wasn't going to be a thrilling exhibition of physicality. What it was going to be was a dramatic storytelling of whether or not Hogan's going to be able to beat this giant. And and then that's where, again, they've tried to call the finish into question before we get to the NBC special of WrestleMania 3. And Hogan leads the charge because it makes a great story. Well, I didn't know whether he's going to let me beat him or not. For even people who are smart to the business, now still he's got a story I can hang my hat on. And of course, it's bullshit. Unless Hulk Hogan had a heart attack and dropped dead in the middle of the Pontiac Silverdome before the match was over with, he was going to win it. And even then, I bet you they'd found out some way to roll his fucking carcass over on the top of Andre. And at the same time, where Jimmy Hart said that Hogan told him, well, Andre said he's going to call it in the ring, I believe that. I believe what he was going to call was the body slam. Now, where Hogan says it was the first time, brother, I ever went to the ring, I didn't know whether I was going to win or lose. Bullshit. But I can believe he didn't go to the ring convinced he was going to body slam him. And Lance Storm had the best take on it on Twitter, saying it's entirely feasible, but at that stage of his career and his physical shape, that Andre wasn't sure after even, however many minutes of what they did, can I go up for the fucking thing? So Andre told Hogan he'd call the slam. If he hadn't called slam, and that's what Hogan always says, slam me, brother, or boss, or whatever. Well, if it hadn't been the slam, he could have had Hogan punch him and he'd have fallen over backwards in the right place for the leg drop.
Yeah, when you see Hogan try to pick him up earlier, obviously the spot is Andre falling on top of him and having the near fall, but Andre wasn't giving him much. He wasn't able to do very much.
Well, no, well, at the same time, I think he was.
Plus, Hogan tore all the muscles in his back when he did that.
Well, no, he just on that first spot where I'll go to slam you and you drop on me. He's like, Andre probably figured, fuck, if I get up in the air, I have no control over how I drop on him. I'm going to squish him anyway. So he just kind of wallered over at that point. Because that's a spot you do with normal sized guys when you've hurt your back or whatever, or maybe a little bit bigger guy fall on top of me. I don't know. A lot of people did it with Andre.
It was perfect. Hey, listen, perfect finish. Place goes nuts for that body slam. And then he hits the leg drop, 1, 2, 3. Everyone's happy.
And that's, again, everybody would, if they had not turned Andre heel and they just had the Hogan and Andre match, would that have been the reaction from the fans? Or would they have possibly turned on Hogan because he'd only been around on top for 3.5 years, but we've loved this guy for most of our lives?
I don't think there was any turning on Hogan in '87. He was still so red hot.
But no, I'm not talking about, throwing bricks at him and trying to cut him on the way back to the locker room. But it wouldn't have been mass jubilation if Andre had never switched heel and they'd have just said, we're going to book the two greatest names the previous 10 years together, 15 years, whatever, and they had the dream match. Would the jubilation have been there if Hogan dropped that leg, or would the people have almost been like, oh, Andre, it's over? That kind of thing, the heartstring tug. That's why you don't have babyface dream matches that mean as much, at least, as this did.
I'll go back to Hogan and Andre in a second on the main event, but after this, Andre would work more with Hogan. He would work with Duggan, work with Jake, work with the Ultimate Warrior. Eventually, him and Haku were in a tag team against Demolition. And that's the end of Andre.
But remember now, what you just said sounded like that would be a long time. It wasn't 2 years.
It was 2 years. You think maybe they should have... I shouldn't say that, because, everything they did there was, at that point, to try to make as much money as they could out of Andre. I was going to say, what about putting Andre in there with a smaller guy somehow that could just bump around for him and make him look more impressive? But I guess that at that point from Hogan on, it was more about, you're a heel now, how do we get the most out of you we can?
Well, and to be quite honest, also, it's not like they were browbeating Andre to show up for work. He didn't want to quit when they made him quit, because that wrestling was his life, and he just couldn't do it anymore. So they were trying to find things, biggest name in the world. He's under contract to us, and he wants to do this, trying to find things for him. But after a while, that's why was it the last run with Warrior was the 10-second jobs?
Yeah.
Where it was just it. And Vince would have never dreamed of insulting Andre by jobbing him out in the normal fashion. Well, whatever you've got left here, you're going to, lose. And all the normal matches that he had, either he won or got disqualified, or if it was a tag team match, the other guy got beat or whatever. So they had never abused that. And then finally, I think when they saw that there's nothing else he can physically do, we can't do this anymore, even if he wants to put him, try to have a match with Warrior under the best circumstances was challenging. To have a match of at that time would have been almost impossible with Andre and Warrior, but it wasn't. They were making it so quick because they weren't just making it so quick because he was in such bad shape they didn't want to stink the joint out. They really set it up almost like it was a fluke thing. Even though it happened multiple times, it was on house shows where Warrior would come in, just start hitting the ropes, clothesline, whatever the fuck, and splash before the thing ever started. So it was almost like a concession to boss, will you do this job for this guy? But we're going to do it so quick, almost like the Buddy Rogers thing with Bruno. It's going to be so fast that people won't believe it. And that's the way they could tell it to Andre, where he would not be insulted, probably.
He had the relationship with Hogan going back to 79. He didn't have a relationship with the Ultimate Warrior, so there wasn't any trust, or there weren't any of those friendship issues. There wasn't any friendship between the two, so that affected everything. And then he would be a tag team with Haku, so Haku could work and Andre could stand on the apron for the limited matches they did as a team. The main event, Hogan-Andre with the twin referees and DiBiase.
Which they glossed over the whole switcheroo with the Hebners and everything. And they just, they blamed DiBiase correctly for bribing the referee and making a bad count, which correctly, but they didn't show the twin referees, which was the big pop of the spot. But nevertheless, the one takeaway from that, and Hogan was correct, to keep him near the ropes because he's got to use the ropes to get up. But again, the biggest takeaway from that's 1988. That was only 35 years ago. Only 35 years ago. But it seems like just a twinkling of an eye. But the viewership for the first network pro wrestling program in prime time since the 1950s was 33 million viewers. 33 million. And say what you want about, well, there was no, cable and streaming and blah, blah, blah. I don't care if there was no goddamn drive-in movies. I don't care if there was no radio. 33 million people gave a fuck enough to watch this on television.
When the Beatles debuted on Ed Sullivan, the crime rate dropped.
Yes. And the point that I'm making, though, is people's talk about the reason for lack of interest in wrestling is because, well, you got more channels, you got streaming or whatever the fuck. If there was only today 3 networks on the air, is there a wrestling program that 33 million people would fucking watch?
Well, I don't think there are wrestling stars who have the aura or the personalities of those top tier guys. I felt the same thing watching some of that Jake documentary. I don't want to get to that right now, but for that era, those guys felt like big stars. Whatever you want to say about Vince's presentation, Ricky Steamboat coming out to the ring in his karate gi felt like a big star.
And hey, wait, and you mentioned also, because I was working for the opposition at WrestleMania 3. Did I know it was going to be a big deal or whatever? Other people had different viewpoints. Some people into business, well, oh yeah, boy, it's good for the business and, good for those guys. And other people are like, well, fuck, why can't that be me?
Is it true that Bill Watts saw that as, okay, it's over, I can't compete?
I do not know, to be quite honest. I never heard him say that. But at the same time, I always looked at it like, yes, I wish it was us and our wrestling is better, but I understand why that these two guys are drawing a huge fucking crowd in a stadium. Because it's fucking Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. And regardless of how good I ever am at anything I do, I ain't never going to be Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant in a stadium. So I can not get eaten up that they outdrew something that I could do. And other guys are, so it was all over the page, but you understood why that was happening, because they pulled the trigger on a fucking match that in our a more limited scope, it's the reason why that I can personally attest to is the reason why the Midnight Express against Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson drew money. And for that short period of time before they left, it's because people did not think they were ever going to see that match. And it was the two best heel teams. You never saw heel teams fight each other. And it was the two best heel teams that had been presented to that audience for the previous 5 years. So, on a much bigger basis, Hogan and Andre were the two biggest names in the entire business that had been presented to that audience for 15 years. And they'd never had the opportunity to see it.
Well, that was WWE Rivals, Hogan versus Andre, and Jim, I'm curious, Andre going from the trunks to the singlet, do you think he had to worry a little less or a little more about manscaping?
Well, I don't think that Andre actually ever worried about any kind of scaping. You've pretty much seen he didn't go to the dentist a lot, and boy, howdy, he just let hair grow wherever. And you know, I never perused Andre's nether regions, but I'll tell you what, you mentioned them earlier. The mutton chop sideburns at one point were a thing, and also when he became a heel, and especially when he went to Japan to look even more villainous, he would often grow a beard. And now I'll have you know that more people are growing beards than ever before. At least that's what I see when I watch the news or see people walking down the street from the comfort of my own home. Everybody's got a beard, but it doesn't look like anybody knows how to take care of it. Most of the time, it just grows on their neck. Their chin and straight up, it's completely shaven. So what you need, folks, is some help wherever you want to grow your hair. Now, I know down below gets all the attention. And, of course, Manscaped was founded on below-the-waist grooming for your South Pole. However, now they are traveling north because some attention is needed amongst the hair on the northern portion of your anatomy, and the folks at Manscaped are tired of every time somebody thinks about dick hair, they think about Manscaped. They want to be known for just hair, whether it's on your dick or just on other dicks that you might know. So nevertheless, guess what they got now, Brian?
Oh, I have no idea. What do they have now?
The Beard Hedger Pro Kit.
That was my first guess.
Well, you should have made it. It's the ultimate package that makes it easier than ever to craft your signature look. We're starting with the Beard Hedger itself, an elite beard trimmer. Now, I've never had a beard except for when I've neglected to shave, and so therefore I don't really know how to groom it, but apparently it's a very involved process. From what I've seen with a lot of people, they don't know how to do it. Well, this waterproof cordless trimmer makes it snap of the fingers easy with the rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. So basically, you apparently can have a beard anywhere from about 1/8 of an inch long to all the way down to your crotch. And that's where you need to get the lawnmower 4.0 involved if your beard's down to your crotch. But if you get it tied up around your beanpole down there and you stand up straight, you might fucking castrate yourself. So don't let it get that long. You know, these things can sometimes get tangled up with each other.
I didn't know that. Don't do that, and I didn't know that.
20 hair cutting links, all with one guard. Also, the Pro Kit comes with 4 dermatologist-tested formulations. And I'll have you know they held this fucking dermatologist down and they tested shit on him. Some of this shit took his skin right. No, they did. Some of it took his skin right off his fucking body.
There is no dermatologist right now who has been deprived of skin.
They told me that this is dermatologist-tested formulation. Some of it ate right through to the fucking bone, but finally they got it right. He looks like shit.
They did not tell you that.
It's going to be a long road to recovery for him, but he was the canary in the coal mine.
There was no canary.
Get everything right.
There is no canary. This story, no. Just once again, no. But Manscaped, yes.
Well, because they have dermatologist-tested formulations. They got the beard shampoo and conditioner. Have you been using the same shampoo on your top of your head hair as you use on your chinny chin hair? Have you?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Am I using the shampoo I use on my head on my chin?
Yes.
You're talking about the real chin, or you're being filthy again?
If your hair chin, if you're
my hair chin,
hair on your chin, you got hair on your chin. Do you use the same shampoo as the hair on the top of your head? Well, silly boy, if you do. You're not supposed to because they got beard shampoo and conditioner. They've got beard oil.
Oh, well, you got to use that.
Beard oil. Let's say, for example, your beard is not oily enough. Well, you put some of this on and you can fry tater tots underneath your neck.
That's not what it is. People apply beard oil and it helps keep your beard smooth. It helps keep it conditioned, moisturized. You rub it in, you really grind it in, and
you rub it in, you grind it in.
It also promotes growth, I believe, hair growth for those of you desperate for beards.
Well, all of us want to promote growth.
I think these things, I shouldn't make any declarative statements like that. I don't know what it does.
Take some of this beard oil and rub it on your dick. You'll get more girls.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not recommended anywhere.
On the dick.
That is certainly not recommended.
Well, we don't know it. As long as you don't shove it up your ass, you ought to be able to do anything you want to with it on your body. But they've also got the beard balm. The beard. You're distracting me.
Yes.
The beard balm.
Oh.
The balm to help keep your beard calm.
You got to use that too.
And it says right here to moisturize, style, and shimmer your new beard. Plus the kit, I'm talking about the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, has 3 free gifts: a beard brush, a comb, and scissors. Well, God, you'll be able to do anything with it. As a matter of fact, everybody should go ahead now and just grow a beard, because you can sculpt shapes, and maybe you can make balloon animals out of it. You can walk around with a porcupine on your chin, or a flamingo.
What are you even talking about? How would that work?
If like you see the landscapers making the hedges into like shapes, you could do the same thing with this. They got the brush, the comb, the scissors, the oil, the balm, the shampoo, the conditioner, the waterproof cordless trimmer, beard hedger with 20 hair cutting links. Well, you can make a statue of the Venus de Milo and have room for both of her arms and legs on your chin, folks, right now. And once you've got your face looking like nobody's ever seen it before, then you must try Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0, because they're going to go right down south and do the same thing. Your nether regions will be unrecognizable, just like your face, after they get finished with you here. But right now, I'm talking right now, put us on pause and go to manscaped.com and use the code DRIVE, and you're going to get 20% off and free shipping. Manscaped.com, use the code DRIVE, 20% off, free shipping. How can you go wrong having a flamingo on your chin and an armadillo in your crotch?
There's plenty of ways to go wrong, but you won't with Manscaped.
There are a few ways that could go sideways, aren't there?
That's right. If you need a shave, our friends at Manscaped have you covered. Upstairs and down.
Brian, you had a good beard, a cultured beard, a very distinguished beard. I bet you'll never guess who had this great beard I'm talking about.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, there you go. See, Sebastian Cabot. Sebastian Cabot had a great beard. The kids could learn a few things from Sebastian Cabot.